Are you ready to do this?
Yeah.
All right.
There has to be a disclaimer
What's the disclaimer?
that I've been up for 17 hours.
Yeah,
straight.
we're going to talk about that.
Well, I'll tell you what. It's going to be a topic you know about. Hi everyone, my name is Ray, or some of you might know me as Tiki with Ray, and today I'm with Tim Glazner, aka Swanky, all the way from, where are you from? Tennessee?
Knoxville, Tennessee.
And you flew into Seattle this morning at 10 o'clock, and it's like 10 o'clock now. Well, no, it's about 9:30 our time, and you've been up since 3 o'clock your time. So
basically, we're almost on 24 hours. We're 18 hours and counting.
But Tim's on a mission, though. You're out here to promote your new book, Searching for Don the Beachcomber. I was so excited when I heard that you were going to be writing a book about Don Beach, because you wrote the book on the Maikai. I love that book. So I knew when you were going to be writing this book, the level of quality was going to be the same. Now, before we get into this book, have you written any other books besides the Maikai book?
No.
So this is your second book.
You've only written 2 books, 2 more than the rest of this room has written.
Why don't we write books, Stephen, just so we can catch up?
Yeah, right.
I don't recommend it.
Yeah, no, it's a torturous process. I would not.
It's not good for you.
What made you decide to write a book about the Godfather of Tiki?
Well, he's the hero figure of this. I mean, he's the one who started it all, and everybody. He's the man.
Yeah.
I would say after reading the book, we and I think hopefully most people who are watching this video know who Don the Beachcomber is as a baseline, but we can do the elevator speeches about who he is in a second for those who don't. But I came away after reading the book more convinced than ever that what we know as Tiki, the idea of Caribbean rum drinks with Polynesia, with the beachcomber aesthetic. What we know as Tiki today would not have happened without Don Beachcomber. He wasn't just a godfather, influencer, beginner. It was because of him that we have what we know as Tiki today.
Well, I popularized or coined the term the Godfather of Tiki in my Maikai book, and it's because he's not the father of Tiki, because other people made what we call Tiki culture, and other people brought Tiki into the Tiki bar, but for people like Bob and Jack Thornton, who started the Maikai, he's the grandfather figure for those guys, not a father figure. So, and also we've got the tie-in with the mom, Godfather of Tiki. So
yeah,
but absolutely none of it would happen without him, because everything about the Tiki bar, certainly his Tiki bar, is autobiographical. He's the one who's traveled around the world and picked up all this flotsam and jetsam. He's the one who went to the Caribbean and tasted the rums and the cocktails and twisted that around and said, how can I make this into something really unique? And then brought it to Hollywood and put the Hollywood view on it and turned it into this studio set. He was working in Hollywood. All of that is straight from his life. He didn't manufacture it to create a persona. It was his persona. He was the guy who'd been around the world. He was the guy who had imported all this stuff. He was the beachcomber, and he did have this amazing palate. He was an amazing chef and the greatest mixologist of all time. It was his life just turned into a bar. Yeah.
But there are a lot of trends that would be inevitable even without an influencer or somebody to push it along. But as you said, the disparate elements of Caribbean rum, of Chinese food, of Hollywood sets, of Polynesia, of Beachcomber. Yeah, we would not have Tiki today without him. Full stop. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, just look at the rum list on his early menus. I mean, it's pages. This is rums he collected himself and had tasted all of them and was blending them together and choosing his favorite ones. You know, you've got a series of drinks like the Mona Punch and the Sugarloaf Punch that are, and the West Indies Punch. These are just a punch recipe, and he's taking his favorite rums and putting them into the Mona Punch uses Mona rum, and the Sugarloaf is a Sugarloafer. He is the master of rum, and he has that palate and that ability to blend those rums, and even went to the Caribbean to specifically bottle his own rums blended to his specifications, so that the Zombie and the Navy Grog and all those would taste exactly the way he wanted, because he was the rum expert in 1940 and much earlier.
Yeah. Let's tell you what, Tim, I mean, you just said something about Don that I never really thought of, but it really just clicked for me, which is what you said. Is like, this was his life. Because I was thinking about like normally, say a person's like, I want to open up a tiki bar, and it's a decision of like a theme, and that's all it is for them. It's just the theme. I mean, not to discount anything about Trader Vic, but originally at Hinky Things. Then it was that he saw Don what Don was doing, and he's like, oh, I want to do that. So, but just like you said, it was like, you know, it isn't like Don's like, I'm gonna open up a bar, and I think I want to make it like a Beachcomber bar. You know, he was it.
Yeah, and he had a hammock under the bar, and he slept under the bar just like he's on a ship in the berth, you know, where he's hanging in a hammock. He was just living the life. He just took everything that he'd experienced and put it into this bar experience for everybody to have. Yeah. And nobody else had this kind of experience. In 1929-30, when he comes to LA, how many people have been around the world twice and been to China and India, and let alone been to the out of the way places, you know? Yeah. Not staying in a fancy hotel and on a cruise ship, but on a cargo ship, working with the local people and trading, and having that experience of the local people, and having to work with the local people and befriend them and be immersed in their culture, to be able to buy and sell with those people and taste their food, which he clearly had tasted all of this stuff and experienced all these cultures and just brought it home with him. And just churned it into this new thing.
And not only was Don Beach the Tiki Bar was autobiographical to Don Beach, but it was a man of his time, because, you know, the other fascinating influence is Prohibition. And I've always been fascinated by Prohibition and how it influenced the tiki template of what a tiki bar is today. But also, you see in the book, I mean, that's where Don got his start when he, you can pick up the story when he moved to LA in 29 or 1930 and had a brother in Hollywood with connections, and Prohibition was going on, and
connections.
Connections. We can talk about.
Well, I mean, you know,
too.
When I first heard about that from Bob Van Dorp, that Don was a bootlegger, you think, oh, bootlegger, how fun! He's running rum, and you don't think about the fact that the guys that you're working with are mobsters who gun down people in the street, tie them up and put them in a trunk and take them in the desert and bury them.
Yeah.
That's really what that meant. And yeah, it can be fun, but when it turns against you, as it did him in a huge way, then it's not very fun. No. And then you go, wait, oh, they did just break into that woman's apartment and set her on fire after beating her nearly to death. And, you know, these things are
real, like, yeah.
They could do that to me tomorrow if I don't do what they say. And so it's not really that great and fun to be a bootlegger. Sometimes, maybe it is, but, you know, he felt both sides.
A lot more dangerous and a lot less glamorous than one might think.
It started out fun and turned very unfun.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, the thing that I took away from your book is like the mob connection, it sounds like, was always kind of there for him.
Yeah, and potentially even before he came to LA. I mean, we don't know about his early days. I mean, he talks. Sometimes he says he had $40,000 because his dad struck it rich in the wells, and sometimes he says his dad, drilled 13 wells and all of them missed, and he was a loser. And then he was working as at his mother's boarding house. You don't earn $40,000 doing any of that. It's probably not $40,000, but if it was, why was he on a cargo ship?
Yeah.
I mean, $40,000 in 1927, that's like $1 million. I mean, that's a huge amount of money.
I mean, a little off topic on the chronology of Don Beach and his life and influence. What was it like writing a book about the consummate teller of tall tales and trying to discern truth from fiction?
Yeah. I mean,
that sounds like a huge challenge.
Well, that was the thing that, again, like the second thing that I took away from your book is like how this guy literally created a myth about himself. The whole thing. Like everything he said, like you realize like every story that he's told about himself is kind of like his own mythology story. How do you write a book? How do you write a book about the truth about a guy where everything's fabricated?
Well, he loved his mother. He called her every week. He very devoted to her, but at the same time, I think he was very embarrassed to be from Mejia, Texas, or Tiger Prairie, Texas. So he created a new story. I mean, you're not going to impress anybody over a bar in Hollywood by saying, "I was born in Tiger Prairie, Texas," which is a town so small that doesn't exist anymore. And we had, horse-drawn carriages when other people were driving cars, and so he came up with a new story.
Yeah.
And how much of that story was actually his brother's story is a big question, because I know now that Pappy, Grandpappy, all of that is his brother. Pappy was his nickname.
Yeah.
So when he's talking about Pappy, is he actually talking about his brother? And then how can you read this story in a way that makes sense to be his brother? And, certainly bootlegging, going to the Caribbean, that could be his brother, who actually took him to the Caribbean for the first time and educated him in the Caribbean. Did his brother own a plantation in Mandeville? I don't know. Did his brother, I don't, it's a lot of question marks. I believe there's a grain of truth in everything he says.
Yeah.
It's just, how can we look at this story and make it make sense to Don's life without, extracting what, I'm going to tell you this story, but I want to tell it to you in the most positive, best way I can.
Yeah.
It's my story, but I'm going to change the facts and where it is and who it is or whatever, but I'm going to still tell you this story, even though the way I'm telling it, it's a lie. Like, names and places have been changed to protect the innocent.
So this video is sort of a three-parter for Ray and I. It's the top of the pyramid. We started with Karen's son, who was the daughter of Sonny's son, Don's first wife.
We read her book.
And we talked a lot about that, and that book raised a lot more questions than answers.
Yes.
And then the Don the Beach documentary, which you're featured in, which is excellent, by the way, really helped close some of the loops. And I know I had met you when you were writing the book, and I was pestering you with questions, and you were saying, all right,
read the
calm
book.
down, read the book.
Read the book.
It comes out. And now we've sort of read the book. So that's sort of the pyramid, and here we are now.
So this interview is like the Return of the Jedi for our interviews.
But the other shape, other than a pyramid or a triangle, is a star. And one of the things that in each of these three things, whether reading her book, whether watching a documentary, or reading your book, is a star. And the reason I take the star, maybe it's a strained metaphor, was he was a star who burned bright. We're really talking about all this influence when we say he is Tiki, the godfather of Tiki. It was really, 1930 to 1937, really? The Tiki part of it? It's a very short period of time that he had this massive influence on this subculture.
Yeah, I would say 30 to 42 when he went off to World War II, he really kind of stopped with the Beachcomber, and he was still creating drinks, up until 1942, and then in 1942, no new drinks came onto the menu for a decade or more.
The thing that I liked about your book is that you talk about that, because there's been talk around where there's like, well, maybe some of the Filipino bartenders come up with some of these cocktails, and you lay it down. You're like, no, these were his cocktails. These are his creations. I mean, his fingerprints are all over those drinks.
Yeah, but to your point, he invented this thing in say 30 to 37, and then he moved across the street and made it bigger and better. But the whole core of it all started, say 30. And it just built from there. The original form of it landed in, I'm going to say 1930, early 1930s, and then he just sort of expanded on that original idea and kept building on those original drink ideas and making it bigger, but following an idea that he had hatched at the very beginning.
Yeah. But even later in life, too, which are the Hawaii years, I like to call them, he was really a very restless, creative individual anyway. I don't think he would have wanted it any other way, to have a long, prolonged career arc. I don't think it was in him.
Well, the thing that I found interesting, and I realized this when I read the book about the Maikai, my knowledge of Don Beach and the Don the Beachcomber chain, I thought, or I assumed, is that he opened up all these tiki bars across the country, going into like the 70s. And, like for example, there was one in Seattle. I thought he was behind, and then I realized, like, no, he created like his first one, which was the Speakeasy, then the one across the street, and then he was like a counselor, like almost like a guide for Chicago. Like it wasn't even like his, and then like
he
Palm
created it too. Yeah, but he did it. But that was it. He did it with a gun to his head.
Yeah, and you realize that like all these Don Beachcomber locations across the country, going into like the next decades, he didn't really have anything to do with it.
Yeah,
and then it was Sonny who was behind it.
Spoiler alert for those who haven't watched the documentary or listened to our videos. Shame on you on this topic. Is by 19...
Go watch the others.
Just watch this one. Just read the book.
Yeah.
Although the documentary and the book are both excellent, I might add. By 1940, he lost the rights to his own creative enterprise. And
what happened? Yeah, what happened there?
Fascinating.
Do you want to talk about that? Or you want to read the book kind of thing?
I mean, we can talk about it, but you still got to read the book because there's so much more there, and it still kind of rattles around in my head, and I don't quite make sense. It took me years of thinking about this all night, over and over, like, this makes no sense. How can this make sense? How can this make sense? And if you read the book, you know where I come down on it is that Don and Sonny were victims of the mob. They were both lost control of the steering wheel. Sonny came out on top. She was the owner. She was the president of Don the Beachcomber. She had half ownership, and she got very wealthy and did very well. But she was also a terrible alcoholic and had a troubled life. Don was a victim. I think Sonny hated what happened to Don. I think she protected him and did everything she could to try to keep him in the money and whatever she could do with the mob to keep him safe and keep him working and making money and convince them he was still absolutely necessary. I think probably as they expanded, he still was using his import business and selling them goods to build out these other places. So he was probably still getting a payday, when they opened up St. Paul or wherever. He maybe supplied furniture or furnishings or whatever. And I think she kept him around, and they continued to have a good relationship. Karen's son looked at Don like a dad. She would just say, hey, I want to go hang out with Don, and she would just go off to Hawaii and stay with Don at his house for months at a time.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, in the documentary, how they play it is it makes it seem like there's the whole thing where Don's in prison, he needs bail money, and essentially she like bribes him out of it by signing over the thing. And then it's like, then all this stuff happens, and all of a sudden now he's like signing over the business to her. And you kind of get the impression that it's almost like she went in there and literally single-handedly stole the business from him. And like all of a sudden, like now, like he's out. But reading your book is exactly, then you realize like what, kind of like what you were saying, where she was like trying to help him in a way, as opposed to just letting him drop.
Yeah, and that point, as you said, it wouldn't suddenly emerge to her. She was not Machiavellian enough to say, for $400 of bail, I'm going to have all the paperwork drawn up immediately to take over the business. It wasn't that kind of happenstance thing. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, isn't there?
Well, Don was running a speakeasy from 1930 to 34, and then he gets arrested. So how was he not arrested in 1930, 31, 32, 33? It's because he had the mob protection. I assume that something happened that the mob pulled its protection from him, and he was persona non grata, and no one would dare bail him out of jail because they would be running against the mob. Everybody knew that the mob had allowed him to get arrested and get shut down for whatever reason that was. Maybe it had maybe Sonny had some part of that. I don't know. Maybe she just had the balls to go against the mob and bail him out and be his partner. Maybe that's where this whole...
the paperwork...
But why would this scheme start in 34 and then not end until
exactly.
1939?
And when you've made friends with all of the Hollywood elite, so even though $400 is a lot of money in the 30s, come on, all of these movie stars, even in the Great Depression, if they wanted to, could have bailed them out in a heartbeat, right?
Easily.
Come on, yeah.
Easily.
And as I said before, it so happened is the book really presents really well. To have all the papers drawn up by one of the mob's preeminent fixers is couldn't be a mere coincidence.
Well, that was one of the things I asked Karen's son. I said, does that contract still exist? And she said no. And I thought about it. I was like, why would it exist? Because it said Don's 50% owner. You don't want that around. You don't want it, yes, it says Sonny's 50% owner, but it says Don is 50% owner. So screw that. She's 100% owner.
Yeah.
She doesn't want a piece of paper that says Don owns half of it.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't exist. She wouldn't keep that because it screws her over. It screws up her story. It's evidence that Don could say, hey, this annulment was crap.
Yeah.
We're half owners. I should get half the business.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I mean, just in general, like back then, did the mob kind of have their ties in with like a lot of things anyway, with like a lot of businesses and stuff?
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying, I don't think I take the impression that this wasn't like a unique situation where like, oh, Don had mob ties. It sounds like the mob kind of had their fingers in a lot of different.
Yeah, but prohibition is key for Don's story.
Well,
and the mob.
So what happens is during Prohibition, the mob gets filthy rich, and they need something to do with all of that money, and a lot of that is people like Sidney Korshak, who came in, who are semi-legitimate lawyers, who helped them take all of that money that was illegally gotten and put it into legal businesses, buying up apartment buildings, buying up all sorts of businesses. And buying up not just a single business but an industry and taking over it, and we see after Prohibition the movement of the mob to become legitimate, where they're just running concrete business, but you want to build your high rise, you've got to buy concrete from this company that happens to be mob owned, and so there's a big surcharge in there.
In New Jersey.
So they become baked into all of these industries, and we no longer realize it's the mob. It's a real business, but the mob owns it, and they're extorting everybody through it. But on paper, you'll never find it. So we go from the prohibition of the mob getting super rich from prohibition to moving forward to buying places like Don the Beachcombers and running a legitimate business, which maybe is doing super well because they're laundering money through it. We'll never know. But all these mobsters have shares in Don the Beachcomber. It's a real business, and they move more and more into legitimate businesses. And today, you don't know mob from stockbroker. You know,
I know.
They just.
So one of the things that I didn't think would interest me, to be honest, is the second half of Don's life or the book. World War II and the Hawaii years. I thought the documentary did a good job of portraying what happened there. But the book was the unexpected surprise to me that I really enjoyed was the second half of, or the second and third act, let's call it, of his life, and the way you wrote that up. And I don't know, when you got into this, did that surprise you or not? That how rich and influential he was in Hawaiiana, and the World War II stories are fascinating, by the way. I'm not going to give spoiler alerts there. Read the book, but I don't know. Were you as surprised as I was?
Yeah, I was surprised at how many different things he was involved in, and how, you know, for everything that he was involved in, there were probably 10 or 20 things that he, you know, was talking to people about and was trying to get involved in all over the world. And I love that quote where, you know, he says, you know, everything I do from now on has to be fun. Yeah, I've got money. I don't need more money, because what does more money buy you? I can eat one meal a day and smoke one cigar at a time. If I have more money, am I going to smoke 2 cigars at a time? No, I don't need more money. I want to have fun, and I want to do interesting things. So, you know, I say the notion, a lot of people say Don wasn't a good businessman. Well, he had a lot of great businesses that did really well.
Yeah, I never liked that rumor. Or that misconception about that.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
I think
we've even
Don,
debated that. Yeah.
I think Don just wasn't a good capitalist. He had profit sharing at the Beachcomber. You know, this is a very progressive man who shared with his wealth, and he wasn't in pursuit of wealth. He was in pursuit of the joys of life, of creating and seeing something in his imagination get built and exist, and that drove him forward, not money.
One thing I wanted to ask you is, at the beginning, you talk about how in the writing process you had to bring yourself into the book. Tell us a little bit about that and why that's so.
It goes back to the whole, you know, tall tales. Because to unravel some of these, best I can tell you, I couldn't just give my opinion without giving you why I came to this opinion and everything that I know about this whole situation, and here's where I land, but maybe you'll land somewhere else, and maybe somebody further down the road will find more evidence and will find something else out of it. But I had to tell the story from my perspective, because it's a non-fiction book. It's a biography, but there's so many gray areas that I'm having to fill in and tell you, you know, what I think happened, but I can't just say what I think happened, because that would be putting my own, that wouldn't be nonfiction anymore. It would be, you know, historical fiction.
Yeah, between mob ties and the shady business of running a speakeasy, of which you found no pictures of the original Don the Beachcomber, which was fascinating. That's how, you know, things were in the Prohibition era. To a teller of tall tales that we know a lot of them weren't true, although there were grains of truth. It's fascinating. So I understand that perspective as well. But now that you've written the book, now that you're out there talking about the book, what is the one thing that you either like to talk about, or was the biggest revelation for you, or the biggest joy in this whole exploratory process?
Well, I worried that I was going to destroy the myth of Don the Beachcomber. That this man who I and many other people have idolized for a long time was going to get toppled off the ivory tower, and his statue would smash into a million pieces because I found out whatever. And in fact, he became more interesting. He became much more the man who's after our own heart, you know. He did travel the world his whole life. He did continue to explore, and he did care more about living a good life than about money, and he was that adventurous guy. He was, you know, I call him the hero figure. I actually, one of the early drafts of the book, or plans of the book, I took Joseph Campbell's myth of the hero and laid it over Don's life, and each of those chapters, each of those points fit perfectly with the hero myth of Joseph Campbell. You know, he travels the world and brings back great cocktails to us all, and you know, instead of fire, it's
rum fire.
It's a Kona coffee grog,
Nice
you know, and you know, and all the struggles that he has. It's a great story, but he is a hero. He is that mythological hero figure, and the more I found out, the more he was even more interesting and more the person after our own heart than I thought he would be.
Splenda? You're gonna snort some Splenda? Is that what you're gonna do? What?
You gotta watch your calories, you know.
Want to support the Tiki with Ray show and look cool doing it at the same time? Then head over to tikiwithray.com and buy yourself a Tiki with Ray shirt. They're only $20. Tony Canepa did the design, and they're screen printed in America.